At the beginning of this, maybe I was more skeptical. As the days have gone on, I'm not sure what I think anymore.
I felt that maybe it wouldn't affect me if I personally didn't believe in it.
Right. I mean, it's a pretty wild idea, right? I think the idea was I was speaking to a friend about magic and beliefs, and they have zero belief in anything magical. And I said, okay, would you let someone put a curse on you? And even though they said they believed in none of this, they went, no way. So that got me thinking, what, people say they don't believe in magic, but they don't want to mess with it either. So it got me thinking, how would that actually work? What would happen? And so that was kind of like the original idea, and then it just kind of came this runaway train, and away we went. It was always the plan. I wanted to find people that were close to me, just it was easy access. And there's an element of, who would we get to do this, and how would we get anyone to actually show us any magical practice on camera? So, I was casting the net quite far and wide. Although I have traveled to Mexico and India before, so I knew there was practices there that I was interested in, so they were on my radar. But yeah, reaching out to magical practitioners in LA, California area first was my first step, and it's surprisingly bigger and broader than people might think. There's a lot of practicing magical practitioners in California and the US at large. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the door closed in my face, and the phone was hung up a lot of times. You've got to imagine, right? Some guy from California calls you up saying, "Hey, I would like to see your magical practice on camera, and would you put a curse on me?" I mean, I must have sounded like a crazy person. So I get why a lot of people wouldn't want to speak to me. What I found was, cold calls and emails didn't work very well. I had to put boots on the ground and go and find people. So most of the people we spoke to, I didn't know I was going to find them until we arrived in that location. And in California, for example, I visited a number of different groups and went to a couple of kind of open ceremonies, just trying to meet people, trying to ask questions, trying to see who would be prepared to speak to me. And I had to convey that this was an honest approach, an honest search into this practice, and I wasn't there to make fun of anyone. This was a very open-minded look at this world. And I think once I had a chance to, look people in the eye and kind of explain to them what I was trying to do, that began to open the doors. But even then, and we see in the film as well, some people flat out refused to put a curse on me and thought I was crazy for it. Yeah, I mean, that was difficult. That was a difficult moment for me on camera to have this conversation for someone to flat out tell me that I'm coming across as a privileged white person looking for this curse in America, and he as an African American in this country feels like his day-to-day is oftentimes cursed. So that's a good point, and I wrestled whether or not I wanted to put that in the film or not, but of course I had to. That's a very real question. People should challenge me on this, and why do I think I'm so privileged in order to put this on? Now, the counter to that was, and I don't believe I'm coming from it from a particularly privileged position. I'm coming from it from a seeker's position, someone who's open-minded and wants to learn more. And so the counter to that was I then found a hoodoo practitioner in New Orleans who understood that challenge. He said, yeah, we do practice, we do test ourselves, and we do experiment in the spiritual world. So for him, doing this was kind of fun. He was like, you're opening yourself up to some stuff that you don't want to get into, but he kind of enjoyed the experimentation of it. Yeah, I mean, he asks that question. A number of people ask that question in the film, and I try my best to explain it. And honestly, there's not really a good and simple answer to it. It's more of a gut feeling. It was more of a sense I wanted to be deeply and profoundly challenged by what I experienced. And I don't believe I've had such a blessed life that I receive blessings every day and I wouldn't notice. I'm sure I would have. I just felt like this would test me in a way that I wanted to feel and experience, and also I have to say, and maybe to step back a bit, going into this, I would say I was more of a skeptic. So I actually didn't think much was going to happen to me. So I figured, throw the worst at me and let's see what happens. I now would say I wouldn't do that again. I don't recommend anybody else does this either. I think it had some effects on me that were absolutely negative and for me personally quite scary. I would say whether or not that's psychological or whether or not that is spiritual magic, I think to a degree that's up to the audience to decide. And I think there could be truth in both sides of that. But yeah, I definitely, the short answer is I wouldn't do that again. I mean, that's a good question and a good, I think to a degree it's easy to take for granted when things are going well, right? We just assume, it's okay. And we put more emphasis on when things are going bad. Like, why have I been cursed? What's happened to me? So you kind of sense you feel that. Maybe that's just a language that we've taught ourselves, and maybe we don't learn to appreciate the good things that are around us. But I think by contrast, the fact that I go looking for something negative and I found it, whatever it was, whatever you choose to believe it was, I think by that same token, if that's true, then you can choose to find positives. So I think that although I don't actively go seeking for positives in the film, by the very nature that I found negatives, I think you can find positives. So if you choose to look at the film that way, and I say towards the end of the film, our minds do have great power. So I think there's weirdly a positive message in the film, but it's not hammered over your head. You gotta look for it. I think this film allows the audience to consider, what did I see? What were the implications of what I saw, and what does that mean for me? And I think that's what a good documentary should do.
So, knowing what you know now, would you still get cursed?
I'm seeking out a curse, a hex to put on myself.
A curse could end your life. You're literally begging the devil to knock on your door just to prove to you that God's real.
He could curse you with stupidity, but we think you got that down.
Despite the warnings, I'm investigating the real-world effects of dark magic.
Looks like you have a lot of love and a lot of opportunity. You are going to cause damage to that.
How do you feel after doing this?
Evil.
That must be quite seductive.
That's the power you're calling on. The devil, right? Quite seductive.
Yeah, so that was awesome for me. One of the highlights of the trip for me. I think that I've always been fascinated by everything to do with psi phenomena. So telekinesis, telepathy, any of these elements of what is psi phenomena really is magic for me. So I think I grew up reading about this stuff. I mean, reading about it factually, also reading about it from Stephen King novels, from Carrie and Firestarter, things like that. So I've always been fascinated by this subject. To me, that is magic. And so I wanted to see, well, what do the practitioners who've been practicing and handing down this ritual for hundreds of thousands of years, can they actually do this stuff? And then I wanted to ask, well, what does the scientists think? What have they found in the lab? And overarching, there is a huge amount of evidence that something is going on. There is evidence for psi phenomena. It's kind of small though. It's kind of small statistical analysis. It's not this big dramatic thing that we hope for, right? So, but the fact that there's something small going on there proves that there's more to this than we think, and the science is always debated. But the problem is, the science is often debated from a closed mind point of view. They don't believe it fits into this world of traditional materialistic science, and so it's shut down before it's even considered. But if you are prepared to look into the science of this, the odds against chance on many different types of psi phenomena are so out there that it's unbelievable that it's not more accepted at this point. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the good news is I'm feeling much better from the dark stages that I was in this film. I believe in the power of the mind, right? So whether or not it's spiritual, whether or not it's psychological, I also believe I am an element of that. And so going through a ritual to try and undo these things that I've put upon myself, I also have made the conscious choice to draw a line. So now when those negative thoughts pop into my mind and I think, oh God, is that the curse? I jump straight to, no, I did that. I've drawn a line under that. It's not that. Don't think like that. So you have to use that and use your mind to kind of keep yourself on the straight and narrow, because I did genuinely have a fear that I'd be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life. And honestly, I can tell you that anxiety, that sense of dread that you have from thinking, what if it's true? What have I done? What's coming for me? It really got me down, and I talk about it a bit in the film, but the effects it was having on me were probably bigger than I'd even alluded to in the film, just because this overall sense of dread and darkness is hard to sort of speak about on camera. No, so we created this curse that was put around my neck. Sen Elias in New Orleans created for that, and I literally wore it. I wore it on a flight to India, which was a moment. But that was actually physically undone, torn apart as part of the undoing ritual. So yeah, I don't have anything other than what is in my mind, I would say. Yeah, so I mean, there's two things. It was a funding and it was a story problem that I would like to have spent more time living with the results of the curse before we, and I would like to have documented that more. I wanted to film myself. I went for doctor's checkups, and I was having terrible headaches. This wasn't in the film, but I was having awful headaches. I was unable to kind of move very well. I had x-rays for that. I wanted to document that, but there's issues with filming permissions, and at the moment when I'm literally in physical pain and I couldn't deal with much else, I couldn't really get around the hurdles of permissions to film and document all of that. So there are some stuff that I wish now we'd put in the film. It would have been more interesting to have a longer journey measuring the potential physiological effects of me. Unfortunately, we see some of that, but not perhaps as much as I'd like to. Quite potentially, yeah. My previous film, I went to the Dyatlov Pass in Russia, which is a supposed cursed place on a story, and that was. So I like to go on journeys. In stories, I like to follow someone going on a journey. Now, I'm an unusual beast that I've never really wanted to be on camera per se, but who else was I going to ask to go get cursed? I mean, what are the legal and ramifications of doing that to someone else? So I couldn't really test anyone else. So I've put myself in these positions because I don't mind being the guinea pig. I like that as a story. I like seeing something happen to someone. So as a storyteller, I enjoy that. I'm not always the most comfortable on camera, and I don't like to be. After every film, I always say, next time I'm only behind the lens. But already I am looking into another story that is perhaps more involved in the psi phenomena, and there may be an element of me being back on camera. We'll see. Yeah, particularly if there's anything dangerous to go test, then I'm probably the first to put up my hand and volunteer. Well, my wife is very comes from a very feet on the floor sort of person. She doesn't really believe in anything spiritual or supernatural. So she was of the mindset like, well, I don't think anything is going to happen to you, so I'm not worried. Go do your thing. But at the same time, she was concerned for me. Like, you're going to find people who have this belief in dark magic, and you're going to ask them to put things on you, and you're going to go to strange caves in the middle of the Mexican jungle and up in the, 2 miles up in the jungle in India. She went, you need to be careful of where you're going. So she was mindful to remind me of that, and I'm cautious. I'm very careful. I've done a lot of documentary travel shoots around the world. I'm quite aware that you always need to be careful. You don't always know who you're filming with and who you're working with. So that was a very realistic risk. But apart from that, the magic side of things, she wasn't too concerned with. That said, she also lived with me going through these results, not sleeping for 6 months, feeling this sense of anxiety consistently. As a matter of fact, my wife is actually a mental health therapist. And so she said to me, you're showing symptoms of this really having an effect on you, and you do need to do something about it. Even though she's not necessarily a believer, she saw that a change needed to occur. Yeah, Painless was a wonderful film to work on. A very, very good friend of mine, Jordan Horowitz, directed it. I was super excited to film that. We had a strong visual conversation about how would we show this character's world. So the idea was the character is a real condition who cannot feel any physical pain. And far from the Marvel superhero versions of that, it's actually a huge negative, and many people don't live very long because you feel pain tells you something's wrong. Go fix it. Go sort something out. He didn't have that ability, and so it was a very lonely, isolating world for him. So we shot New York in winter, which kind of lent itself to the tone of the film and the isolation that he felt as a character. It was a beautiful project to shoot and work on. I'm glad you got to see it. I'm very proud of that work, and I know Jordan's very proud of directing it. And I'd love more people to go see it. It's sometimes hard for independent films to find their feet and sort of get out there, but people should go check them out for sure.
I'm going to enter into a pact with Satan.
Señor Satán, Lucifer, presentamos a este hermano. Con tu fuego purifica.
Wyong is pretty much the epicenter of all black magic. People are very scared to even talk about it.
Y'all better not call me at 2 o'clock in the morning talking about this man is dead. I don't want to hear that.
I have this physical feeling that something bad is coming. What have I done?
You're going to have to find faith in this in order to undo it.